Good afternoon. I'm A. Allen. I'm here with my fellow vendor, John Kidd.
Hello. Hi, I'm John Kidd. You are watching Streetwise live on CAN TV, Channel 21. We are also streaming live on cantv.org hotline. You can also join the conversation by calling 312-738-1060.
Last week we were in Vendors Week celebration of 9,000 street paper vendors selling 100 different street papers in 35 different countries. Streetwise celebration of vendors. Here's a few pictures of our vendors in action last week. Okay, let's see what we at. Nevertheless, we having some technical difficulties. Let's try another vendor. Let's see. Close that one out. Go to this one, Hosey. Okay, here go Hosey. Let's take a look at one of our fellow vendors, Streetwise vendor, Hosey. All right, Hosey. Show us what you got, Hosey. Hosey, hold a minute. Let's go back to Hosey. No, that's not Hosey. Hold on. Hold on. Give me just be patient with me. Just a minute, please. Oh, there go Amanda and VW. Hosey. There go Hosey. Okay, this is a picture of our vendor, Hosey. He's at a Walgreens location. And going back, let's see. Going back. That's VW. She's at the location with my supervisor. That's Amanda Jones. And they're out and they're celebrating Vendors Week. Hey, there go the vendors, Chicago vendors, Streetwise vendors. Okay, moving right along. Okay, we showed you a picture of VW and Hosey. For more information about Streetwise, you can check us at www.streetwise.org or on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can even check us out on YouTube. Now today, this week is packed with celebration of Black History Month. Streetwise Chief Editor Suzanne is here to talk with us about the Race Riot of 1990 and their lasting effects. Okay, the cover of our Streetwise is Race Riot of 1990. 1919. And now we're here with Suzanne Haney.
Hi, nice to see you. So the reason we did this edition is it's been 100 years since the Race Riots of 1919. And the Newberry Library received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to study its lasting effects because it set in motion some of the segregation patterns that we still see in terms of policing, education, and housing. And if we want to go forward as a city, they want us to just consider the collective consciousness of these riots, what they've done for us, and whether we want to keep this pattern. Because if we do, we're going to do more of the same. It's not going to grow. We're not going to be in a healthful, mental, emotional, economic growth pattern. So can we get a tighter picture of this, of these riots? Can we show you some of these pictures?
Yes.
Okay, so these pictures were done by a Japanese-American photographer named Jun Fujita. This particular photo, go a little bit deeper. So these are some headlines from the newspapers. These are the National Guard. Actually, that's what we would call them today. They were called the state militia, but we'll go a little bit, we'll talk about that more. So why did we do this? Well, it's 100 years. The Newberry did this project. So let me talk about how the race riots started.
Okay.
They started with the Great Migration. What people may not realize is the Great Migration started in the middle of World War I. What happened was Europeans couldn't come over anymore because you had a war disrupting traffic across the Atlantic. But there was still a need for labor. So the business agents from the stockyards, which were a cattle-killing facilities. Chicago had the biggest stockyards in the world. They extended 1 mile square between 39th and 47th and Halsted and Ashland. There were 40,000 people employed, basically killing cattle and, I believe, pigs, and packing them into meat processing. You had Armour, Swift, all big meat processing companies, and they sent this meat all over the world. And these were the largest in the world. So when they couldn't get labor from overseas, they went down south and they said, why don't you come up here and take a job in the stockyard? Same thing with some of your other factories. And so in the 10 years between 1910 and 1920, Chicago's black population doubled. It went from 50,000 to 100,000. But they're still packed in this same little area between 22nd and 47th, and a little bit, say, east of Wentworth for maybe 4 blocks. It wasn't even as, about Cottage Grove was the thing. If it was any farther east of that, it was white. So as they got more money, well, so 1919, okay, so the war ends in 1918. But the next year is a recession because after a war, the government isn't spending as much money anymore. So it's just the basic private sector spending money. And the businesses are like, oh my God, we don't have the contracts anymore. You know, we're not sending meat overseas to the army. We don't have the money. So they lay people off. So you've basically got people fresh from the South, from living from sharecroppers, as sharecroppers, and you got people fresh off the boat, and they're like, wait a minute, where's my piece of the pie? I want my piece of the pie. I'm not giving anything up. Okay?
Okay.
So what happens is you've got real estate groups saying, we're not going to give an inch. They're bombing realtors who rent to blacks or sell to blacks, and you've got, by the time of July 1919, you've got one bombing a week. You've either got people bombing the offices of realtors, or you've got them bombing the homes of blacks who've kind of stretched outside these borders. And the poet Carl Sandburg was actually a reporter. He's talking about how the whole problem of not enough jobs and not enough housing, because by the point of 1919, you're short 50,000 units of housing. You've got veterans coming back from the war, and they're ready to start families, they're ready to get started again, and there's no housing. Because also, the economy hasn't shifted yet. I mean, it's another year before they start getting ready to do housing.
Okay.
But people just haven't got their money straight because they're still coming in off the war. It's a business kind of thing. Business and policymakers don't always agree, okay?
So would you say, I have one question, would you say that's the reason why they established the black belt, or somewhat pushed the black people in these certain neighborhoods?
They were already in these certain neighborhoods. So you've got, in 1917, you've got people starting to say in Hyde Park, we're not going to let them go beyond this line. Because when they do, it brings our property values down, which is the same argument they're saying in 1950 and 60. Of course, what happens then too is if people sell out of panic, then the house goes cheap, and then they can resell it. So it's kind of like this whole economic thing going on. But yeah, that is the reason. They're trying to keep people in their little space because that's how economically they've done it.
Okay.
That's what they know. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, that's what they know. So,
my impression is that the black belt, what they call the black belt, is like a area that black people live in, but not only an area that they live in, but it's an area that they pushed in and packed in.
that's exactly right. So there's 100,000 people living there, and there should be only 50,000 because that's what they need.
Okay.
But they're trying to push the boundaries, but they're not letting them. So you've got bombings every week during July 1919. You've got a trigger incident. There's some young boys. The witness to this was 14. but there's a young man named Eugene Williams. He's 17. He and his friends have built a raft, and they're floating on this raft between 29th Street and 26th Street. That's the beach that's a black beach.
Okay.
And when they get towards 26th Street, that's starting to be the white territory. And there's this kid on a breakwater. He's actually 24. He's throwing stones at all of them. And Eugene gets hit in the head, and he's flipped out, and he's flustered, and he drowns.
Okay.
And so the other kids swim to the shore, and they tell the blacks on the beach, Eugene drowned because someone hit him in the head. And they point out the white guy who did it, and the police don't arrest him. So the blacks on the beach get upset, and they have a mini riot, and I believe one of the police shoots a black. And so the rumors go all over the south side, and the whites respond, and overnight, this is a Sunday night, overnight, they start rioting around the area that's the border. So the border is about Wentworth and Wells Street. That's where the blacks are here and the whites are west of there.
Okay.
Because there had been blacks going past that boundary, and whites were retaliating on them.
Okay.
So anyway, the riots go on for like 4 days. That's a Sunday night. The next day is Monday. You've got people going to the stockyards, coming out of work, blacks coming from work, and the white mobs are getting them off the trolley cars. They're pulling the trolley cars off the electric lines and attacking them. And then on Tuesday, you have mobs in the Loop attacking blacks, and also one ethnic group thought, rumor again, that blacks had killed one of their kind, so they killed someone in retaliation. Wasn't true, it was a rumor. And then Wednesday, finally, the mayor calls out the National Guard. They called it the militia at the time, but it was the National Guard. Now, the reason is the police hadn't been responsive.
Okay.
But the people had been concerned because the year before the National Guard had come out and they hadn't helped blacks. But this time they did. They were calm, and they kind of assumed order. The other thing is it rained and it got cooler. And people were exhausted. They'd been fighting for 4 days. They were just enough.
Fighting for 4 days.
Well, and I think people need to understand, we tend to look at things 100 years later and say, oh, this wasn't nice. But you have people who aren't going to give in. Now, the other thing is, even at the time, the upper class people are like, oh, this is the low class people doing this. White and black. Low class.
Okay.
But that's not really fair. These are people who are finally getting a piece of the pie, and they're not going to give up anything. And you can't blame them. You really can't. I think we need to look at things and say, okay, what do people really need? Even now, what do people need? Why are they upset? Because they're desperate. So that was part of it. Beyond that, the violence, and I personally think, okay, there were also soldiers, and they were used to a certain amount of, energy and stuff. Right. So when their territory gets threatened, they respond.
It's natural for them to respond.
That's right. And they maybe also have weapons because they got discharged from the army with them. Right. So it's like, whoa.
Okay, so I can deal with it.
Would you say in 1919 as compared to 2019, is it worse? Is it worse than it was then? No? Would you say so?
I don't think so. I think that's what the Newberry Library is investigating with us. I talked to Brad Hunt, who was, I believe, a vice president of programs, and he's saying we can't have just one program on this because it's we need to examine why we keep doing this in terms of policing, education. Education in 1919 was very segregated. They had kids in basically trailer classrooms, just like they did in the 60s, the Willis wagons, which were named for the superintendent who had trailers instead of integrating kids in the schools. I think it's really the same, and that's what they're saying. Why are we 100 years later doing the same thing?
And can I elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes.
By me being a spiritual man in the church, people was trying to solve spiritual matters with political answers. See, we a lot of people don't understand it if they're carnal minded. They don't understand that we are in a spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual warfare. We fighting against demons we don't even see. And what drives people to do what they do is who they got living on the inside of them. Demonic spirits. So really, we have to look deeper than the outside of a human being and see what drives this person to do what they do. So we'll never get the problem resolved or solved by trying to solve spiritual matters with political answers.
No, but we might solve it with physical things. We might solve it if we know that people get the right housing. You know, we might solve it if we solve people's physical needs. Can you zoom in a bit?
Yeah.
Well, you might treat it, but you won't solve it because the enemy, that's the destroyer, that's the devil.
That's true.
Until he's done with, you're gonna still have evil that's in the world.
Okay,
The devil
now
is still gonna control people. You won't solve it until he's out the way. Period.
And that may not happen. That's something we can expose people to, but we also need to be dealing with their physical needs.
Yeah.
Now, this is one of the photos of Jun Fujita. These are all kids. We don't know exactly where this is. This is kids, and you can see they've broken the windows of this house, and they've obviously driven the occupants out. They're standing in the windows, and there are other windows that are broken, and they're cheering. Very scary photo. Obviously, they did this because they saw the photographer looking at them, and so they posed for him. Still scary. And this is photos of some of the gangs ready to stone a house. There's maybe the little crops growing in the backyard here, and this is one of the black houses. And this is some of the militiamen talking to one of the potential people on the street. And this is more of the militiamen sitting around.
The National Guard.
We would call them the National Guard today. Now, this is a map. Can you zoom out a bit here?
Yeah.
This is a map of the area, not quite so much. So they're saying this is 29th Street Beach. That's not quite right. The beach went from 29th to 26th, and they're saying that's where it started. And this is arrows of all the major spots. If you will notice, there's police stations all over here, and here's the stockyards. Again, from 39th to 47th, Halstead to Ashland. So it's this huge area, 40,000 people work there, and there were obviously some layoffs after the war, and people are upset. So there's isolated violence all over here. The main line is about here maybe, which would be Wentworth, and down here, the Cartage Grove becomes the eastern boundary of the Black Belt. So, some of the things we can talk about, again, there's going to be activities. Starting February 23rd, the Newberry Library is cooperating, as I said, with 13 different cultural groups, including the Urban League, which was started during this era by whites and blacks to help blacks assimilate. And so the first program is February 23rd. It's going to be at the DuSable Museum. They're actually going to have a reenactment. A young actor is going to portray Eugene Williams, and then they're going to talk about various things: policing and violence, media and race, housing and color lines. And so that's the kickoff. It is during Black History Month, but there are activities all year. There's going to be an April session on reporting on race, a May session about housing. How do we break down the boundaries? Say we've got boundaries for Latinos, boundaries for Asians. Why do we do this? Is it a good thing? Do we keep doing this? And if we do, we're going to get the results we got. So maybe we got to change. June, there's going to be a program on segregation in education. For example, there's a movie by Cartemquin about the boycott of 1963, when 200,000 kids stayed home. And so that's that one. June 29th, there's going to be a bike tour visualizing the riots. And there's other programs in July, August, September, October, and November. And if you want more information, you go to chicago1919.org. So do we want to also talk about the One Chicago for All Alliance.
Yeah, you could elaborate a little bit on
So
that.
we've got just a few minutes. We're going to take a quick talk about that. One Chicago for All Alliance is LISC Chicago and about 20 other groups, including Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council, Austin Coming Together, CARA, Bickerdike Redevelopment Corporation, Anlache Chicago, Auburn Gresham Development, Lawndale Christian Development, Logan Square Neighborhood Association, Near West Side Community, a number of them, POAH. And so they were talking about different issues. One of the things they've talked about is, can we have equitable outcomes? For example, could we have evaluate proposed spending and recommend ways for public investments to be inclusive? So a number of candidates responded on that. They had 3 questions on affordable housing. One of them is, could we put more resources in the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund? This provides rental subsidies to people whose incomes are no more than $17,000 for a single person. And the candidates said they liked that, and they said they would work to prevent displacement of low-income residents from gentrifying areas. And they also asked them about education. There was a question about community schools, which is similar to a New York program, and they're saying, could we make these schools more like neighborhood hubs? In other words, not only can students learn there, but their parents can go there to access social services, and activists can come there to discuss challenging issues. So the candidates said they did agree with that idea. And they also had an idea about expanding Chicago as a sanctuary or welcoming city, which is basically saying we're not going to look at immigration status, and we're going to make sure there's the confidentiality of documentation, for example, when we're providing city services. So, and then they also talked about accessing capital to invest in neighborhoods. They're going to start a fund which would make sure that we have more money to invest in neighborhoods. So.
Okay, great. Susan, I was just thinking that I heard this quote: "Those that do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it."
That is a famous quote, yes.
Okay, and so going back a little bit, tell me what motivated you to write this article about the race riot in 1990?
Precisely what you just said. If we don't learn from history, we repeat it. Because it's not just, history isn't just dates, it's experiences people had. I mean,
Right.
It's economic and psychological experiences that make them say, oh my God, we've got to be segregated because it was too painful. I mean, both internally and externally, the community was like, this was painful. But really, if we keep doing what we did, we got what we got. Not good.
Right.
So, yes, that was one reason. I was looking for a good Black History Month story, and I remembered the race riots, and then I found out about Newberry Library doing this. Again, they've got programs every month. So, and it's a way for people to discuss Chicago together.
Right.
And what are we going to do?
Yes.
So that was it.
That was a great article, and it's very enlightening. And you heard it first here on CAN TV from Streetwise. Okay, we have our very own editor, Suzanne Haney, who wrote the article about the race riots. And to me, in my opinion, we came very close to it. But I'd like to mention, anybody want to get involved with Streetwise, if you're not doing anything, you want to make some extra money, come out to orientation. We have orientation Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 2. Come out to orientation. We'll get you started with 15 free papers. We'll get you a badge, and we'll find you a location. You, too, can be a Streetwise vendor.
And we're located right off the CTA Red Line stop at Wilson.
4554 North Broadway. You're
Suite
welcome to come.
350, third floor, south end of the building.
You're welcome to come, and we'll get your wheels rolling with Streetwise. You can be a part of this if you like, and you can make some money at the same time. We'll welcome you. We have a lot of programs that we have to offer. We have a job program. We'll feed you. We have a clothing program with hygiene kits. Come out and see what we got. Just come see for yourself, okay? And you, too, can be a part of Streetwise.
And maybe be on the show sometime.
And become a part of our family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.